of Detonation. I'm your host, Steel Archer, and I have David Woods waiting in the wings, the chair of the London Futurist Society. While I go through the sponsors, because we do have a new sponsor that I'm really, really excited to talk about, David will throw the live link around and hopefully get some more people to come on to this episode of Detonation. So, as always, this episode of Detonation is being sponsored by Thrivous. Thrivous is a human enhancement company. They're doing supplements and geoprotectors. They're really, really good. It's really, really good stuff. If you're into human health, if you're into human well-being, you got to get yourself some Thrivous, and you got to go and compete with Mike DeVerde, who keeps soaking up all the prizes, apart from Brett Nally. Brett Nally also winning some prizes out there. This episode of Detonation is sponsored by Thrivous, the human enhancement company. Thrivous is giving exponential gifts to Detonation fans. Each gift starts at $5 and increases exponentially to $160 based on the number of fans that share this episode of Detonation within 24 hours. Check out the rules at the bottom in the description of how to get yourself some free Thrivous. David Wood, you can enter that competition as well, by the way. Everyone is entitled to enter that competition. You got nootropics, geoprotectors. Who can't go past it? Human enhancement. It's really, really good stuff. So thank you very much, Thrivous, for doing that. And we also do have a new paid sponsor that I've got to announce. David Kelly, thank you very much. He's jumped on board with the I Am Transhuman campaign, as you see there on your screen. I Am Transhuman. Thank you very much, David Kelly. So check out that website. It's devoted to a lot of the greatest transhumanists out there in our current era. Very, very exciting stuff. Thank you very much, David Kelly, for doing that. Yes, so on to the star of the show, David Wood. I've been so excited to have you on. Our last chat was so incredible, and now we're here to talk about your book, your upcoming projects, transhumanist politics, and a whole raft of other things. So let's go into the most exciting thing. I mean, I've been plugging this a lot on the channel. This is the RAFT 2035 Roadmap to Abundance, Flourishing, and Transcendence. Now, I can't put this book down. Yes, you've got it right there in your hands. Inverted. There you go. I can't put this book down. This is incredible. This book is full, jam-packed with information. The variety of subjects are incredible, and the world is going to be an incredible place. This is about physical well-being, the mental well-being of people, the upcoming automation apocalypse that's coming down the road, how we can eliminate homelessness and hunger, evaluating the education revolution and how we can integrate technology and technological change, how we can reduce the crime rate through a human flourishing, how we can diminish the amount of international conflict. We're talking about open borders and a different border system around the world, carbon neutrality, fixing up environmental issues, zero waste, clean meat, humanity on Mars. It goes on and on. Nuclear fusion, politicians and trust, politics and AI, and some other things there. David Wood, it's such an exciting, it's so exciting to have you on Detonation. Welcome.
It's my real pleasure to be here. I also very much enjoyed our last discussion, and I'm really glad to be able to pick up the thread again. And you've clearly made a good job of looking through RAFT 2035. I wrote this book to try and spell out in more concrete terms, if we believe in a transhumanist vision of a better world, what's actually involved, not just in the long term, not just in some hypothetical time in the future, but what do we need to do in the next 5 years? What are the goals that we can get behind? Concrete, bold, stretch goals, but things that are credible to accomplish by 2025, and how this leads on to much wider changes by 2035, which is just 15 years into the future.
Yeah, it's not long, and you know, a lot of people gawk at this idea of immense amounts of change in 15 years. But if you only reflect on the last 15 years or the last 30 years, the change is getting more and more and more. And I mean, they've done a good job. Society has done a good job adapting to the huge amounts of change that that has really come our way. Things like this coronavirus, it's kind of interesting with this coronavirus because suddenly it shocks the system a little bit, and the system starts to reconfigure about how interconnected it is, how much technology has changed the way we live. How complicated society is and how it can break down really fast if if there's a little shock to the system, and how much energy is put and invested into rejigging the system. I found this coronavirus to be quite an interesting case study in interconnectedness, in the amount of change and the amount of sort of laissez-faire attitude towards the change that's happened. But that can't continue, David, and this is what you're talking about in the fact that the biotech revolution, the nanotech revolution, the cognitive tech revolution, and some of the other revolutions in science are going to be far more dramatic than we have seen up until now, and far more earth-shattering. And how are we going to deal with those consequences?
You're absolutely right. Potential for the next 15 years is more change than any previous 15-year period in history. It could be very tumultuous indeed. And it's because there is so much new technology the whole time. It's not just a small number of people in a small number of countries around the world nowadays who are doing these new products. There are people in every country who are educated to levels as never before, building on each other's ideas, learning from YouTube about the latest technologies, and coming up with really innovative ideas. AI is coming forward in leaps and bounds. It's not just the old-fashioned AI of expert systems. There's been the dramatic new wave of deep learning and neural networks since about 2012 when that broke through. That's only the next phase, and there is likely, I believe, to be other large jumps forwards with AI technology coming in new waves involving things like transfer learning, things with causality, AI that understands more about emotional intelligence. And indeed, as you can see on the screen, many people have written very kind feedback about the potentials that technology provides to us, and the challenge to us as humans to ensure that the values that we care about most get elevated and supported by these new technological changes, rather than us regretting what might happen if we are a little bit blasé or too laissez-faire about some of the technological possibilities.
Absolutely. Nanotech, infotech, biotech, and cognotech. So let's ask you, what is RAFT? What is with the title? This is not just any old title. This isn't about a literal building a raft off an island. This is actually an acronym for something with an interesting vision, which is why there's a picture of water. But what is RAFT 2035?
So I'm struggling to find the right ways to introduce some of these concepts, and sometimes I talk about this as a transhumanist policy initiative, but in some parts of the world, transhumanism has developed, for right and for wrong, a bad smell. So I'm looking for an alternative way, at least, to introduce the topics. I've used the word techno-progressive sometimes in the past too, but again, it has some adverse connotations, some meanings that some people don't like. So I'm trying to find a new word just to get the conversation going. And RAFT stands for Roadmap towards Abundance and Flourishing via Transcendence. So the roadmap means it's not just a vague vision, it's a step-by-step set of ideas. Abundance is what's possible via this technology, that it will no longer be a world of scarcity in which there's a great deal of conflict, but there will be enough of everything for everybody to have a deeply satisfying life and experience. So an abundance of flourishing. And the final part of that acronym, the T for transcendence, means we won't just be the same as before. It's not that we will having the same kind of life except more of it. We will be leaving behind, transcending some of the worst aspects of human nature that we have inherited. So that's all possible. But at the same time as being an acronym, it is a metaphor too, that when the waters are tumultuous, you need something secure, and hence the raft is that picture which is on the front of the book. And so far the term has been well accepted, and I can call upon people, if they're interested in what's being proposed here, then get on the raft, get on board, help to make it bigger, help to make it more stable, help to make it go faster, and help to do some of the projects that are timetabled for 2025.
Oh yes, absolutely. It's there's 2035. Well, yeah, the small projects, and this also lines up very closely to the UK's techno-progressive roadmap that was published by the UK Transhumanist-Party. You know, is this simply just the book version of that vision, or is there a lot more additional information packed into here that you won't find on the techno-progressive roadmap for the UK?
So it is an evolution of these ideas, yes. So for the last year, 12 months, transhumanists in the UK have been discussing what could we ask political leaders in this country to imagine is possible for 2035. And we've gone through various ups and downs of thinking about various goals. And these 15 are the ones that have emerged. And some of the ideas have already been covered in a series of videos. But this book, it's still designed to be lightweight. It's not a big, heavy book. There are other books that have much more information if people want to delve into some of the underlying theory, but this is meant to be pocketable and lightweight. It's something that people can read relatively quickly. But there is more information in it, explaining the rationale for each of the goals, what the goals mean, why they're credible, and very importantly, what are the technologies that can be developed to make these goals come about.
Yeah, and I remember with the techno-progressive roadmap, you basically open sourced it. You kind of Creative Commons the idea where you allowed other political parties to adopt platform planks and platform ideas from that. You know, that's kind of interesting. The United States Transhumanist Party, the UK Transhumanist Party, you know, they need to, because there needs to be some sort of collaboration, even if these political parties don't take off in a certain way where they actually gain some sort of you know, established power where they don't win any seats or anything. The ideas are such that they should be adopted by larger parties in part, right? And this is kind of the same thing with this book. It's kind of like in the same thing with this book is like, even if academics, you know, don't mainstream adopt it, if they can adopt parts of the thesis, you're going to end up on a better trajectory dealing with these certain technologies. Because I find a lot of the academic works, they don't, you know, because it's very important when you're reading this to take in some of the assumptions. And, you know, one of the things you said in the beginning of the book was a lot of political philosophies look back on a time that was better, that was more simple, and they try and revert to the past, or they try and deal with issues that are kind of aging issues. You're trying to encompass here issues of nanotechnology, a hypothetical idea that's very, very possible in the future. Infotech, which contemporary political parties are struggling with. They can't deal with cybersecurity. They can't deal with the mass transfer of information. They don't trust it. They don't know how to. They don't know how to deal with it when it comes to when it comes to the stock market or the exchange of goods and services, Amazon being a prime example, Amazon.com, biotech. This they have no idea about. They talk in generic terms. A lot of political parties talk in generic terms of investing in science and technology, not actually really realizing the implications of something as fundamental as biotech, and understanding that if you do raise the human human lifespan, I mean the costs and social implications of that on budgets and things like that, but also the benefits that you can draw on that. And cognitive technology is something that is absolutely misunderstood in mainstream society. So what do you think? Do you think that even if the UK Transhumanist-Party and the USTP can't in full have real political power and real political action, that these can sort of be some of these ideas can be copied and pasted into some of these larger platforms in order that we can get even a fraction of the human flourishing on the very lower end of the optimistic scale?
Absolutely. So there are people in all of the main parties who have some sympathies with the transhumanist point of view. Some people whose instincts take them to the political right, other people whose instincts take them to the political left. But they are all, in all of these main parties, there are people who are open, at least partially, to the ideas of technology accelerating positive transformations. So there is an openness there, which I'll be happy for people to pick up our ideas and run with them. I do have to say, however, that the full strength of these ideas is in combination. As I say several times in the book, the sum of the parts is much greater than the individuals. There are parties who do look at some of the individual targets. There are people talking about what can we do to get to carbon neutrality? Could we adopt a clean meat? There are people looking at some of the ideas in reducing crime, for example. But actually, for the full implications of each one of the areas, you need to take into account the developments elsewhere too. So that is one thing that will distinguish us as transhumanist thinkers, pointing out the interconnections between the different ideas. As I said at the beginning, there are 4 technological revolutions, and each of them was going to make the other ones go faster. We will have more progress with AI, in part because we're going to have progress with nanotechnology that enables new kinds of chips, including quantum computing chips. We're also going to have progress in AI because we have a better understanding of the human brain with the scanning of the brain that takes place with improved cognotechnology. So that's some reasons why we're going to have bigger technological progress than many people anticipate. And likewise, the impact on human experience isn't just from one of the 15 areas that I covered in the book, but it's in their combination. That's what makes things more tumultuous, potentially really wonderful, and also potentially, if we're not very wise, more terrible. In terms of the transhumanist parties gaining more political power, I don't give up on that, but various things will have to change in both the US and the UK before that can realistically happen. In particular, we'd have to move away from the current first-past-the-post systems which apply, in which if you're a third party, many people think, well, I'd like to vote for you, but if I do vote for you, it might mean that other party who I really dislike is going to get in. So I can't vote for you, transhumanist, because I'm going to have to vote for somebody else instead. And it is interesting, if you compare the fortunes of, let's say, the Green Party, if you compare the fortunes of the Green Party in Germany and in the UK is lumbered with our first-past-the-post system, whereas in Germany there's much more proportional representation. And the fortunes of the two parties have been very different. In Germany, there are Green politicians in federal power in, I think, the majority of the different federal regions. And they're having a positive impact in making people think about ecological, environmental issues. So in due course, I really do hope it's much better for politics if we can move away from this archaic first-past-the-post system. But until that happens, then what we have to do instead is to just feed ideas into the political landscape and champion them and look forward to people in all the other main parties picking up some of the ideas and realizing that actually there's a bigger strength to be had from seeing the overall picture that we are advocating.
Yeah, before we go on, I have to remind people what we're doing. We're talking about RAFT 2035, Roadmap to Abundance, Flourishing, and Transcendence. Look, this is a really important book. You got to pick it up. You got to read it. This is a really, really, really important thing to do. The ideas in this book are really, really interesting. I mean, I can't put it down. I'm about halfway through. I haven't had time to finish it, but I'm telling you, this is mind-blowing stuff, and it's really important for transhumanists, and it's also important for anybody out there who plans on living anywhere in the foreseeable future towards 2035. I'm telling you, the implications of the technologies are huge, and like David was saying, it's interconnected. Okay, it's interconnected. So the more advances we get in computing power, the more we're going to have in cognitive power, the more information that'll be transferred, and then everything builds on everything, and that only means it only gets faster. It gets faster and faster, and the implications of human change also get faster with it. So, so the change that has happened up until now, we're in 2020 now, has been rapid. He's been absolutely rapid. If you don't realize that, I think everybody watching this channel does. But if you don't realize that, well, you will realize it in the next 15, 20 years because the change is even going to get more rapid. And things like artificial limbs. I mean, artificial limbs were a science fiction of yesteryear, and now they are right around the corner. For example. And we have to look at augmented rights. I mean, augmented rights are coming around. And is society just going to slip into this modus operandi where you have augmented rights, for society, or are they going to be ostracized? How about people with augmentations, David? These people are coming around. They're kind of cybernetic people with cybernetic implants and stuff. Do you see these types of people proliferating, and what about rights for these types of people as we progress towards 2035?
Well, absolutely. The experience of the LBGT community is a kind of foretaste for what's going to come. At first, society sort of shudders and says, well, gosh, these people are a bit weird. We're not quite sure we want to have them around here. And it's taken quite a battle to assert that the people in these communities should be afforded every right and every support. It could be the same as people increasingly augment themselves, as people have new limbs, as people have new senses, as people have chips inside themselves. Today, there are a few people who go around with chips inside this web in their finger. It does a few things for them. I think quite soon these chips will be connected with biosensors that will be feeding in real time very useful information. So there's going to be a sort of a division between people who are chipped and people who are not chipped. At first, it's only going to be a small difference, but increasingly, people who take advantage of these enhancements will have more capabilities. We sort of saw it way back in history, the division between the literate and the illiterate. Now, for most of history, you didn't need to be literate. You could do very well without learning to read and write. But then, as society has moved on, if you were illiterate, you actually were cutting yourself off from so many possibilities. Now, it's possible that in the quite near future, those of us who enhance ourselves in various ways, those of us who have headsets. I used to think we would have smart glasses first. I now think it's more likely that people will have smart earbuds. And these headsets, which people wear, will increasingly speak to us in real time. As I'm talking to you now, my headset in the near future will say, David, mention this now. Or I might say, David, you've been talking too long, hold back a bit. Or David, don't forget to smile, and so on. So it'll be this little voice in our heads. Now, it may be that people have got these voices in their heads are just much more capable and much more productive than those who are unenhanced. So how do we cope with that? there will be more diversity than ever before. And we don't want to say everybody has to be modified in the same way. Absolutely, we must preserve the rights for people to be the equivalent of Amish, the Amish communities who adopt some technology but have got reasons of their own for not adopting technology. So we must support the right for people to be humans 1.0 rather than humans 2.0 and all kinds of bits in between. So this diversity will challenge us more than before. Some of the cultural challenges that people are experiencing now when they feel that their traditional ways of life is being overrun by immigrants, say, or people who dress differently or have different foods, that's only a foretaste of what's going to come in the future. And how do we work out? How do we coexist? And it doesn't mean we have to say anything goes. We are entirely within our rights to say, well, there's lots of variety, but there are some things that are beyond the pale, and we're not going to accept. We're not going to accept if communities say that burning witches is okay, or if child slavery is okay. For example, we're going to say some things are not all right. But what do we decide we're having, and what do we decide we're not having? Well, that's actually one of the projects I have earmarked for 2025: a clarification of the fundamental new human rights values. What do we want to uphold as being paramount for everybody? And what do we want to say, hey, anything goes. Let's have this variety. Let's celebrate this diversity. And it's going to be challenging. People are going to feel uncomfortable. And we're going to have to some extent, overcome our feelings of discomfort, because these are just grounded in instincts which are no longer so relevant. Things that might have made sense in thousands of years ago are no longer the right instincts to guide us. But some of the instincts, we're going to decide actually they're good instincts, and we're going to say, these things are not acceptable in this new society that's going to emerge.
Wow, that's pretty profound. Yeah, I totally agree. And we've had a couple of biohackers on this show. We've had Tim Cannon. I really like Tim Cannon. He's a really good guy. Zoltan Itzvan, actually, he's a biohacker himself. He has a microchip in his hand. And Meow Meow, he's a guy here from Australia in Sydney. He has a microchip in his hand. He illegally put it in there to do his public transport. He put a public transport trip in there, and the government got really upset with him for modifying the chip. Went to court. He won, and then because it's his body sovereignty, and they didn't have any or something, and then. But anyway, he took it out eventually, and he reinstalled another one for his bio lab. But these people are kind of on the fringes a little bit right now, but they are coming down the road. I mean, you have a Zoltan Itzvan running against Donald Trump. I mean, this guy has a microchip in his hand, so it's a lot closer to home than people feel. And the augmented people, they kind of, as you say, this kind of already here. I mean, who doesn't own a mobile phone? Raise your hand. Who doesn't walk down the street looking at their smartphone? Raise your hand. And it's hardly anyone nowadays. Actually, I was reading a thing from the Times or something, or The Economist, and they were saying in the modern era, the spies are looking for people who do not own mobile phones as targets, because as targets for operations, because they're off the grid. So you're becoming a target if you're not connected into the social media landscape or into a landscape of the world, and it's kind of already how much interconnectedness and how much diversity there is that you're odd if you're not walking around with external augmentation, i.e. a smartphone, which the adoption rate is very, very high. It's very rare to see people without a smartphone, for example, in today's world. And this isn't that awkward, because people still see it. It's on the external. They still see it as a tool. The companies have been very good at showcasing these as a consumer product that's kind of trendy, that you kind of want, from the Walkman to the iPad to the iPhone to the earbuds. It's all been very cool. It's all been external, but the technology is going inside now. This is the whole different idea, and I think Elon Musk is doing a great job with Neuralink to sort of sell this trendy idea of brain augmentation, this cognitive idea of augmentation within the brain. and it will be okay in some respects if you can keep that cool factor hanging in and hanging around. But that, I don't think that's necessarily true. And I think we really do have to worry about what you were talking about as one of these interim goals, which is a new constitution for future people. This United Nations human rights was set up as human rights, but humans are diversifying and changing and modifying now, and I don't know if a lot of these people will fall under that definition, and that's why this book is so timely. We are coming up on a point in time now where the definitional strengths of the United Nations and a lot of these these governmental factors based on human rights are not the rights don't cover the new brands of people that are being built as we speak. You agree?
Absolutely. And the document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was a great piece of collaborative endeavor, I think 1946, 1947, it was written in a context when it was assumed that most people would need to go to work. It was written in a context when it was assumed that people would grow old and die. And these assumptions are no longer the case. It's no longer necessarily the case that everybody needs to grow old and die. Technology is within our grasp to undo that. And it's also the case that automation will be able to create most of the things most of us need for a good quality of life without us having to go and work for a living. So the old assumptions that a healthy country had a high employment rate no longer apply. So we need to reconsider what is the appropriate social contract and what are the appropriate definitions and boundaries that we want to respect and not respect.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about automation in 1 second. Let's remind our viewers that we're talking about RAFT 2035, a roadmap to abundance, flourishing, and transcendence. You can get this on Amazon. It is an absolute must-read. I'm telling you. I'm about halfway through it. It's fascinating. It's very cheap. It's a pocket size. You've got to go out. You got to get it. It's amazing, and it'll blow your mind. I'm telling you that much. I do have a question from the party secretary of the USTP. I usually don't do this, but the party secretary of the USTP is very important. That's Pavel Elin coming in. He says, "Hello, David. Would you mind to share your vision of how we can change the cultural narrative? How can we insert the idea that death is wrong into the cultural mainstream?" Thank you very much, David Wood. That's Pavel Elin, party secretary of the USTP. David, how can we insert death is wrong into the cultural mainstream?
So the approach I've taken in RAFT is to emphasize extending health span. So I haven't gone out and said we have to assert straight away immortality is the right way to live. I have said that what is possible, what is desirable, is that health span, which is measured as the amount of time that people would report themselves as being in good health. You know, later on in life, people will say, well, they're no longer in such good health, and they're no longer in their health span. And currently, in most of the developed countries, health span is somewhere about 63 years old. And of course, some people are healthier longer, but that's the average figure. And the goal that RAFT talks about is let's get by 2035 that average health span up to at least 90 years old. Now, the way we can make this acceptable isn't just by saying, well, it's good from a humanitarian point of view, because it avoids the heartbreak of people losing their relationships with their loved ones. It's also good from a very basic economic point of view, because as people grow old and get ill, the majority of people incur lots of social costs in the years of decline. It makes life harder for their family members who sometimes need to attend to them, and people will often consume more healthcare resources in the last 5 years of their life than in all the previous years. But what I talk about is learning from super agers. So this is something that I think everybody is potentially interested in, that there are a minority of people in the world who reach the age of 95 without ever having suffered from cancer or dementia or diabetes or heart disease. And the remarkable thing about these people is they don't live forever, but they tend to die quite quickly, which is still not ideal from a transhumanist point of view, but it is much better from a social point of view because they have a good quality of life right up in most cases to maybe a week or two or maybe a month or two, and then they may get an infection and they may die of quite quickly. So these people are much better for the economy. They will be participants in it, and if they want, they can work longer. So that's the first line of argument, which is to say it's actually good for the economy, it's good for society if people don't go through these long extended periods of decline. Then we want to emphasize all the things that people can do in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. We want to highlight examples of people who are super agers and who are still participating in a fascinating set of things. And then we just need to highlight maybe the most important thing of all, which is what is the purpose of living anyway? And for most of life, the assumption has been, well, the point of living is to work and get a job and somehow to bring new generations into the world. Well, we have to clarify again, what is the point of being a human? The point of human is to be creative, not just in the sense of creating children, but in the sense of creating new worlds, creating virtual worlds, creating music, creating art, participating in games, participating in sports, participating in culture. And then we want to highlight that this isn't something that stops when you reach the age of 65 or 75. It's something that in principle should be going longer and longer. So stage by stage, we want to get people towards that realization. Finally, the other interim goal for 2025 is we want to make it clear that at least for some other creatures, not necessarily humans, but there are some other creatures, possibly dogs, there will be interventions which can be given to a dog in the middle age of their lives. So when the dog is maybe 6 or 7 years old, that will give them new leases of life, that they will be chasing around, doing all the frisky things they did when they were younger, rather than deteriorating. And the reason why this is a good interim goal is it can be demonstrated much more quickly. Whereas with humans, if you want to demonstrate that humans could now live to 140, well, you've got to wait another 20 years before that's possible. But for dogs, you can see the impact bigger. So I think it's a goal that we should be getting behind, enabling these demonstrations that some other shorter-lived animals can have rejuvenation in midlife. And when people see that happening for their loved pets, suddenly it will change their thinking. I believe actually that most people have got two minds coexisting inside them as regards the desirability of a longer, healthier lifespan. I think there's a natural part of us that wants to live long and healthy as possible. But most people are sort of, that coexists with another idea, which is being put there by society. It's been put there by traditional religious thinking and traditional philosophical thinking, which is, you naughty person, it's selfish to be thinking that you should live too long. It's the mature thing to step out of the way and let other people flourish instead. You've got 80 years and 10 or something, or 80 years and 10, as the King James Version of the Bible says. So these two ideas sort of coexist, and depending on circumstances, either one or the other can come to the fore. Well, I think that if people can see their loved animals suddenly getting a new lease of life, it will embolden them to think maybe this can happen for humans too. And it will allow that part of people's minds to come to the fore rather than the deathist view, which has been sort of sensible. It's been sensible not to fight too much against death because people get frustrated. And so it's been sensible to an sense to accept graceful decline. But it's no longer sensible because now science shows us that we have super aging within our grasp, and indeed negligible senescence within our grasp.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I was if I was someone who was in charge of a government budget, I would want to be listening to this because you aim for productivity in your nation. So if I'm a lot of the Western world, if you live in the Western world, you got to know that a lot of the Western world is aging massively. It's becoming a big old folks home, and there's not enough young people to support it. Apart from the United States, the United States is a complete outlier. But in Germany, in the UK, here in Australia, Canada, you go around and around and around. Italy is a really bad. The demographics are awful. So if you can find a way to fix up that aging population and make them a little bit more productive and have a longer, happier, healthier life in a little bit more of a productive way than simply shuffling them off to an old age home or old age home, you want to be listening to this. It's really really important stuff. And I like this dog's idea. People are very attached to their pets, and maybe it'll shock them into a little bit of a system shock. A lot of people suffer a lot of trauma when their pets decline. They get very emotionally attached. A lot of pheromones and emotional attachment attached to animals. But yeah, if that can allow them to realize, then that's a really good interim target. Mental well-being. Let's talk about mental well-being before we go into automation, which is the big one. Mental well-being is a really important aspect of this book. What is mental well-being, and what is it that you have planned in the space of mental well-being, especially with a lot of cognitive sciences being beefed up across the world, and also the proliferation of social media as well, where there's a huge issue there with mental well-being, whether it's good or not.
I sometimes think that the goal on mental well-being might be the most important out of all of the 15. Life isn't just about living longer physically, of course. It's about having a really sharp mind. It's about having powerful experiences. But sadly, for too many people, stress overcomes them. People go through periods of obsession. The depression is becoming in some ways the major drain, the most serious drain on health anywhere in the world. For people of a certain age, I think it's something like between 19 and 40. For men, the biggest cause of death is suicide, which is caused by mental issues. So there's a growing epidemic of mental unwellness, and this is something that needs to be addressed. Sadly, far too many people from the pop world, from the worlds of culture, from the worlds of sport, suddenly you find out they've died, and you want, well, how did they die? And it's often hushed up, but quite often they just committed suicide. It's terrible. So part of the goal is to undo that trend, but it's more than that. It's that more people can access on a regular basis the higher states of consciousness, which occasionally people talk about, the mystics, the gurus, the musicians, the craftspeople. They get into this flow state. And most of the time we're not there. Most of the time we're living at a kind of 70% perhaps, or even less of a true potential. So how can we get more people into this higher level of consciousness? And when we're there, we're less likely to do foolish things, because frankly, all of us do foolish things from time to time. We damage relationships because we get a bit too grumpy, a bit too self-centered. We make bad judgments. They're sometimes called cognitive biases. They're sometimes called stupidity. We've inherited some of these biases from evolution, and our modern culture sometimes makes them worse. So let's get into the state when we are able to make the best choices, and when we're kinder, when we're more sympathetic, when we're not just cleverer, we are wiser. And there is technology that will help us now. There have always been some things that people could do, whether it's different kinds of therapy or meditation or yoga, which have helped people along the way. Well, now we can accelerate some of this. There's a whole field called transformative technology. A growing community of companies around the world that are offering mechanisms, including apps, but including also things that interface more closely with the body and with the brain, that help users to more reliably get into a better mental mode. So it's not just avoiding mental ill health, it's positive mental thriving, and it's the key to higher levels of consciousness. So we can do this perhaps with these apps. We can do it with enlightened use of drugs of various sorts, whether it's the nootropic smart drugs or in some cases psychedelic drugs. And this brings me to one of the areas of change, because most countries in the world, for understandable reasons, are very frightened by psychedelic drugs. There have been many problems caused by ill-advised use of psychedelic drugs, but with wiser use, it's a bit like wiser use of motor cars. You know, if people use motor cars foolishly, they cause death and mayhem. So before people are allowed out on the road with a motor car, there's lots of training they need to go through and pass the driving test. Well, similarly, I believe psychedelics has the potential to allow more people to access these higher states of consciousness. And there's a whole field, a whole long list of other things that's mentioned in the book. But I believe that unless we improve our resilience, our emotional caliber, we're more likely to make wrong decisions. We're more likely also to identify with the dangerous tribes. You know, we are far too tribal, most of us. Most of us have got an instinct that says, I belong to this kind of tribe. You know, I'm a left-winger, or I'm a right-winger, or I'm a libertarian, I'm a progressive, I'm a whatever. And too often, if we're not in the 100% good state of consciousness, we too easily get into this us versus them mentality, and it disturbs the ability to really have an open mind. It closes our mind to good ideas coming from, quotes, the other side, you know, because in most of these political battles, there is actually often valid and important points of view on all sides. And not that all sides are equally valid, I'm not saying that, but often the opponents or people who are not like us do have insights which we need to be open to embrace and adopt. So unless we have this higher caliber of individual thinking, individual kindness, individual wisdom, the risk is that we will use our technology to abuse each other and to frustrate each other and to distort each other's messages, when instead we should be learning from each other's messages, at least partly.
Yeah, and I'm actually really glad that you mentioned psychedelics there. I was going to bring that up as a point of interest, because I too agree that I think firstly there hasn't been enough study into psychedelics. I think the you know, there was an open window there in the 60s and the 50s and the 60s. There was an open window there to do a lot of evaluation, but because of, you know, machinations by the governments, especially the U.S. government with different arms of their government, you know, the whole psychedelic debate was shut down and never really got reopened. That's a portion of the book, just reminding the viewers that we are talking about RAFT 2035. Sorry, what?
The reason I'm showing is that each of the chapters has got, like this one, a reading list at the end. So if people are interested in some of the ideas that are touched on, so there's many communities mentioned in here. It's quite difficult to get the camera angle right.
Oh, I can find that on
in there.
Sure.
There are a different angle. There's the Center for Psychedelic Research at Imperial College, which is doing very interesting work here in London, near where I am. There's a consciousness hacking community, and there's a number of books that I mentioned in each section, like there's the book by Michael Pollan, the food writer, How to Change Your Mind, What the New Science of Psychedelic Teaches Us About Consciousness, Dying, Addiction, Depression, and Transcendence. Yes, so that's the chapter headings. That's for more information at the end of chapter 1 on increased physical well-being, and the one I'm just referring to there is the set of for more information at the end of chapter 2, increased mental well-being.
Oh, okay,
so
cool.
You're quite right. There has been some research in the past which has been fitful, but I am highlighting areas of good research that's still going on, which I believe those of us in the transhumanist community, at least part of us, some of the time, should be offering our support to that. And then we should be campaigning for various changes in the law, not for blanket acceptance of everything, but yes, you've got it there. Excellent. But not for blanket acceptance of everything, but for wise choices, things to be supported, things which now make sense with our better understanding.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you mentioned psychedelics. I think that as you said, there's good research going on there, and I'd like to see more additional research into psychedelics. Also, you know, people like Thrivous, nootropics, geoprotectors, these sort of more legal pathways as well. I think that these are really important, and cognitive studies as well to help and assist with mental well-being is really important. Like you were saying, money doesn't help. A lot of these sports stars or these actors or actresses or singers and songwriters and whoever they are, doctors, dentists, a lot of dentists, I mean, they're not short on cash. So there's obviously some other problem there that needs to be worked out. And a lot of technology and a lot of innovation can assist with that. Just to remind people, we are talking about the book, RAFT 2035, Roadmap to Abundance, Flourishing, and Transcendence. That's by David Wood, the chair of the London Futurists, who we have right here. It's an absolute honor to have you on, sir. So let's talk about automation, because automation's going to do. There's a lot going on in automation. Because we can tackle the homelessness and the hunger with automation. We can tackle reducing crime with automation. Some of the international conflict stuff, especially talking about resource scarcity. So let's talk about automation. Is the automation apocalypse coming? What's the future of work, and what's the interim goals on automation?
So many people are afraid that automation is going to put them out of work. Whenever I talk about AI, it's the question that comes up again and again. People say, tell me, what job should I get that I'll be safe from having my job replaced by AI? But I think we should turn that conversation around. Instead of being afraid of automation replacing humans in the workforce, we should welcome it. We should say this is a better state of affairs to get into when we have cars being driven by robots rather than humans. They will in due course be much better, much safer at driving. The automation in farms can be done by robots. I mean, robots in the past already replaced the horses, and increasingly they'll replace the humans working in the farms too. Teachers can be replaced lots by this too, doctors, even nurses in due course. And we shouldn't be fighting it. We should say there is a post-work world ahead in which the automation is generating enough food, it's generating enough energy, it's generating enough education, it's generating enough homes because of mechanisms of 3D printing, robotic construction, drones to help supervise things. It's a means to transform positively almost every field of life. People are afraid of it because they sometimes wonder, well, how could society be structured if people didn't work? Well, that's what we need to clarify. We need to work out and emphasize what this new social contract will be. To what extent will universal basic income or unconditional basic income be a key part of that? I believe it is part of the new social contract, but it's by no means the defining characteristic of it. I would see the defining characteristic of this new society is that more and more things are available at lower and lower cost. Currently, governments are sort of challenged to raise the economy, to raise the GDP, to have more valuable goods produced and bought and sold. Well, I would rather have the emphasis on the basics for a good life becoming cheaper and cheaper and eventually being essentially free, in the way that many online things are currently free. It's once you've paid for your online subscription, the more and more things are available with no additional cost. So it should be the same increasingly with all the basics for a good life. But some things will still cost money, and so there will be some redistribution of the abundance that's generated by this automation, and some of it should be available unconditionally. Arguably, some of it could be made available on a conditional basis. We might say that some portions of payments will depend on people doing various things. We can discuss what they might be. That's a good discussion to have, whether people need to be involved in various social activities or some educational activities. Other parts can be targeted to people with special needs. And how this is all going to work, how it can be implemented in stages, how the money is raised, whether it's raised from different kinds of taxation. VAT is what I believe Andrew Yang in the US is highlighting. Zoltan Istvan also in the US has a slightly different emphasis on the utilizing money from national physical parks. There are other national public dividends that are available. I'm going to be doing an interview myself on that topic shortly with somebody called Peter Barnes, who's written a very interesting book on dividends for all a number of years back. So this discussion needs to be had, and I believe that by 2025, first of all, we must have agreement on what this new social contract will be, this techno-progressive contract, in which no longer do we say most people are expected to work unless you've got some special condition. We will say most people are not expected to work for money, that is, although we will be working on things that are important to us, but we won't be working for money anymore. So that's the first goal, this clarifying this new social contract and how it will be introduced. And the second one is to replace the GDP with a better metric for defining the direction of the economy. And it will put more emphasis on reducing the costs of all the key parts necessary for a good quality of life. And we'll do it in stages. We'll start off with quite a basic set of goods and services, but over time we will add more and more into that. So it will be no longer seen as a basic income, it will be seen as a good quality of life, and increasingly an abundant life will be available for everybody for almost no cost at all. So let's clarify how we're going to measure that. The GDP has been a useful construct in the history since it was introduced, I think, by Roosevelt with the economist Simon Kuznets. But we've known its defects for a long, long time. It's high time that we hurry up and replace that with other measures instead for whether politicians and the economy is going in the right direction.
Yeah, we need new ways to form human flourishing, and a lot of the education metrics or the healthcare. I mean, you were talking about human lifespan. I mean, a lot of that is owed to GDP, and I don't argue about that. A lot of you see increased GDP growth, you see a better health, wealth, and education across the board. A lot of billions of people have been lifted out of poverty because of the GDP metric, but it's just not. It's been good, like you say. It's done its function. It's brought the world up to a certain level, but we're hitting that. It's a bad term to use. I can't think of another term, but we're hitting the glass ceiling now on what its limits are. We're hitting the limits of its potential, and we do need to move on. Do you also see, with advanced automation and prices of everything lowering, do you see a post-monetary world? Do you see a world where, forget about cryptocurrencies, these things are too small, I don't think they will take off in a dramatic way. They'll be there, but I think the governments are too powerful to enforce the fiat currency because of taxation and because of what they can do and because they have the guns. So fiat currency isn't going away. But do you see a post-monetary world coming where we change the credit system, that money sort of gets redefined, and that we have a different form of credits? Maybe it's energy, or maybe it's something else. Or do you see money, currency, actually still maintaining its power going forward, even in a disruptive world that you're talking about?
Lots of good questions there. I'll start by saying I'm not opposed to growth. I think we transhumanists should be embracing growth, growth of technology, growth of the capabilities of automation, which has, as you said, lifted huge numbers of people in recent years out of poverty. It's been remarkable. We just need to be sure that we're measuring growth in the right way, that we are taking account of the externalities as well, both the positive externalities, which often aren't valued enough in our measures of GDP, and also the negative externalities, which again we don't take sufficient account of. So let's revise GDP, first of all, that it's got these externalities included, and second, that it's not just looking at the financial metrics, but it's looking at the other measures of human flourishing. Will we be in a post-monetary world anytime soon? Probably not. I do think that more things will be free, so there will be a larger part of what was currently part of the monetary economy becoming instead freely available to everybody. But I do think for the foreseeable future there will be some things that are still scarce, new things that are developed. There will be things that there has to be decisions about, and the money is a technology. Frankly, it's not something like gold that you dig out of the ground. It's not a good. It's not a thing of nature. It is a thing of technology, and the money has changed over the centuries, and quite rightly that it's changed as society has become more sophisticated. Money has become more sophisticated, with lots of things. So there's inventions of bonds, inventions of insurance, inventions of limited companies, inventions of some of the financial derivatives, which have got a bad name, but they're not all bad. In fact, they just were used foolishly, it turns out. But some of these financial innovations should be developed even further, in my view. So I'm not against money. I think there is a role for money, but it shouldn't be the centerpiece of life. So I think the financial industry is too self-serving. Too much of the money is made by financiers exchanging money amongst themselves. And we need to tie it back to ensuring that finance is serving overall positive flourishing. In due course, money might disappear, but I think that's further down the line. If I'm looking at what needs to be accomplished by 2035, I believe money will have evolved, but it will still likely be present. And probably there'll be multiple currencies too. There will be roles for some cryptocurrencies, sure, and roles for some fiat currencies. I don't think fiat currencies are entirely bad. I think it has been a great invention, the ability of banks to generate money in a controlled way. Where it's gone wrong is when people have generated money in an uncontrolled way without the proper considerations.
Yeah, I totally. Yeah, I agree. I think it's too big of an institution right now to talk about a post-monetary world. But yeah, it is interesting that huge amounts of evolution are coming down the. And how does automation? How does automation impact things like homelessness? 3D printing houses, things like this. What do you say to that?
Well, let's
Poverty.
look again at China. We mentioned the corona crisis, coronavirus right at the beginning. One of the remarkable things we can see is that in Wuhan, they're able to build a hospital in 7 days. So it seems, they're going in there with modern building technology. And if we really put our minds to it, if this was a priority, instead of rewarding the construction industry for pushing house prices up and up, which a certain part of society likes, because a lot of members of society have got some of their personal wealth tied up in property. Instead, we should set the goal to be able to create beautiful houses quickly. And some countries are doing a better job of that than others, and we should be embracing that. It doesn't need to be hugely elaborate, but it can still be ecologically friendly by taking advantage of a modular housing assembly, taking advantage of new materials that are more resilient. Nanotechnology isn't just about particles and about nanobots for medicine. It's also about new materials which are greater resilience, greater strength. So with the right focus, with use of drones, with the use of it's called buildings information management, which is already being embraced by the construction industry, but taking that further, I believe we can have many more houses built much more quickly. And it is terrible that places like San Francisco have a coexistence of such wealth and technology on the one hand and so many homeless people on the other. Now, to be clear, one reason why many people are homeless is because of something we talked about earlier, which is mental and social problems. There are many brilliant people who end up homeless because of bad things happening in their families. Either they themselves have got mental issues, or other people that are in their family have got mental issues, and they get driven into this terrible, awful personal circumstances. So one of the reasons there'll be less homelessness is when we make progress towards this goal for 2035 that the majority of people, I think I say 90% of people, will declare their mental conditions as good all the time. Actually,
that's a really good day to look forward to because you're going to get a much more stable world. I mean, one of the things that homeless people struggle with is actually homelessness. It's an actual thing you struggle with. But yeah, it's dramatic because once you become homeless, you can go from being opera conductor of an orchestra one day to someone that spirals down because you lose those access to those resources, you lose access to networks, you lose access to basic medical, your shower, your sleep pattern is ruined, and the collapse could be quite sudden and quite frantic for people, and that's a real issue, and that's a real problem. So once people become homeless, they stay homeless for a while, for many months, until they either get pulled out by some non-for-profit, whether that be a church or a non-for-profit organization or a government organization, but that doesn't always happen, and it's a terrible thing to see. But if you can prevent that, and a lot of this show is about prevention, if you can prevent that cycle, that downward cycle from happening in the first place by people declaring themselves mentally fit, where they don't have to turn to drugs and alcohol or prostitution or internet pornography or whatever to sort of get that dopamine, or to get that psychological hit where they can now artificially evaluate themselves as good, then you're looking at a much better, much cleaner society. Again, to remind the viewers, we're talking about RAFT 2035 Roadmap to Abundance, Flourishing, and Transcendence, and that's by David Wood at the London Futurists over there in the UK. Now, what I wanted to talk about right now is international conflict. We talk a lot about international conflict here on the show. International conflict is something that's been going on forever. It's especially prolific in Europe. Europe is just one international conflict after another. The EU rose up to try and knit the continent together. What's up with the international conflict? How can we move away from international conflict and keep the sort of peace that's been going on in the Bretton Woods system since World War II, horrible World War II, which was a reverb of World War I. We want to keep this peace momentum up. It doesn't look like it's particularly promising, but how can we do it, David Wood?
This is one of the hardest topics, I find, but we can't shy away from it. The risk is that the technology is going to put more mechanisms in people's hands to wage war, whether it's so-called killer robots. This isn't the ones who become self-aware as in the Terminator. This is just robots that have given autonomy. It's not just flying drones that are reporting back information to humans who make decisions about what to do next. There will be drones that have got some intelligence built in to recognize the faces and say, oh, this is one of these bad guys, I need to take him out. And the military people all around the world are they're aware of dangers of this, but they also at the same time, they don't want to be left behind in an arms race. And it's not just the mainstream military, it's the dissatisfied people. There are people from time to time who become suicidal, and in their suicidal depressions, they sometimes wish to take out other people. There was this very sad case in Thailand just a few days ago of a soldier who, for whatever reason, decided to take out lots of other people with him. Now, he had a particular weapon available to him. In due course, some of these people are going to have bigger weapons available. There was a German pilot a number of years back flying a German wings flight. He, for whatever reason, got suicidal. He waited until the main captain had left the cockpit. He locked him out, and he programmed the in-flight automatic control to fly right into the middle of a mountain and killed everybody on board. Horrific. It's another kind of weapon. Now, before long, there will be biotechnology weapons, perhaps. There will be other nuclear weapons. Kim Jong-un has got them in North Korea. So far, he is not inclined to use them. But there might be groups there who are more extreme and more crazy than others. So we have to look ahead and say the peace that has been kept, thankfully, by and large, with many terrible exceptions, of course, in wars around the world, but like Syria, like Libya, other battles that are waging in different parts of the world, which are terrible, but they could get a lot worse with more people getting access to this. So how on earth are we going to stop this? And I don't have very pat answers, but I think we do need to look at a couple of options. One of them is monitoring. Monitoring's a sort of a controversial subject, but somehow there is systems that we can trust to keep an eye on what's going on. And when there is evidence of an outbreak pending of some sort, then somehow this can be flagged up. So I call this trustable monitoring. And many people say, oh, this smacks of Big Brother. I don't like it. But somehow we have to find a way of a system that can do this monitoring and can highlight the risks of things going on. Not that it's going to preemptively take people out. I don't want that. I don't want the system then saying, oh, this looks like a bad guy who's going to launch an attack, therefore we have to stop him by killing him. It's not like that, but it should be drawn to people's attention. So developing this system of trustable monitoring. The other thing I talk about is we need to nurture relations between people around the world so that the Iranians and the Americans can see that despite sometimes wearing funny dresses and speaking in funny ways, there's a great deal of commonality between us. So let's build up these relationships. Let's have more exchange of views. And finally, let's map out how the United Nations and the other Bretton Woods institutes can evolve, because they are failing now compared to what was set up for them. They were set up with some assumptions in way. A certain number of countries were elevated into the Security Council for historical reasons. This now needs to be rethought, and we need to be open-minded about how it takes place. And we have to be bold and accelerate the transformation of these organizations. We can't just let the weight of inertia slow down the necessary reforms. Some people say, oh, this is terrible. It's going to lead to a world government, and world governments are the worst of all because they're going to do terrible things. I see that we have to figure out how we can have agreements without having a single power in a world government. And after all, we do have agreements already of some sorts. We agree how we're going to play the Olympic Games, for example. We have countries from all around the world with lots of different political philosophies, still managing to agree enough that we gathered in Rio in 2016, and hopefully we'll be gathering in Tokyo later this year for the 2020. There is agreement on rules, even though there is no world government. There is a particular body that has some delegated authority to decide which games are going to take which sports or parts of the Olympics, and makes rules on doping, which are quite controversial, but there is a mechanism there to have that discussion. So we need sort of similar things to take place that doesn't remove the autonomy of individual countries, but allows this discussion to take place. And I realize this is a bit vague and waffly, but my goodness, we need to have this discussion. And so I'm saying this is something else that needs to be progressed rapidly between now and 2025.
Yeah, and we need stronger information technology councils as well, where countries that are underdeveloped and are going to stay underdeveloped in the technological sphere need to quickly adopt ethical integrations of these methods and mechanisms, because what we're talking about, humanity is diverging. I mean, I've had like I said, a couple of biotech people, with chips in their hands, and yet there's other countries and parts of the world that don't even know what microchips are. So there's a gap there, and if we have diverging diversity of people, these people have to be recognized in other countries, regardless of not whether their populations recognize that or not. You need to have, for example, I'll just say a random country that might not have any sort of functioning analysis on this would be South Sudan. It's a brand new country. It's only existed for a couple of years or a year or two, whatever. And this country here has a lot to learn, and really fast. On a lot of issues, but these issues you would have to have an accelerator on that. Things like Brexit with the UK and the EU. Now the UK has a lot of catching up to do with a lot of its laws, a lot of its mechanisms of integration. It has to relearn a lot of things that it could outsource before to the EU to do a lot of its problem solving for it. So things like that, and also, a lot of the changing dynamics of countries, and also what to do with problems of refugees, what to do with problems of international conflict and people who are being displaced by climate issues as well, and how technology can impact these debates and these issues. I'm going to remind viewers that we're talking about RAFT 2035, a roadmap to abundance, flourishing, and transcendence. Check it out. Google that. Go to Amazon. Buy it. It's the most amazing book, people. I'm telling you, it's really, really, really good. We are sitting here with David of the London Futurists. It's just a really, I'm absolutely honored to be talking about this. We've gone through a lot of topics here, and there's a lot more in the book. I don't want to spoil all of them because I want people to go out and read this as well. But humanity on Mars, I can't go past this. With Elon Musk, with SpaceX, with Blue Origin, with NASA, with the whole proliferation of intergovernmental, with governmental space authorities everywhere from the Middle East, Dubai, to Pakistan, to Iran, to you have your own one in the UK. Space is becoming there's a race for space, and there's even the Space Force in the United States, which is seeking the weaponization of space. On the other hand, which is not, but there's a race for space, and one of the ideas in this book is kind of along this notion of Elon Musk's dream of, which is Elon Musk's dream, but humanity's dream of having a colony on Mars, a perpetual human presence. Let's talk about Mars colonization and/or moon colonization, the race for space. David Wood.
So the ultimate destiny of humanity isn't to remain on this earth. The universe is a vast, amazing place. Most of it seems to be lifeless, but we humans can explore and in due course create life elsewhere in the universe. One of the most remarkable things that's happened in my lifetime was what happened in the 1968, 1969, when astronauts left the Earth and traveled to the moon. And when that happened, it really changed the consciousness of people on the Earth all over. One of the astronauts on Apollo 8 afterwards said, we traveled all the way to the moon, but what we actually discovered was the Earth. Because they looked back and they saw the Earth framed as a single picture. And these pictures actually helped to launch a whole new environmental movement. It was used, that picture on the book, the Whole Earth Catalogue, which was very influential. Now, I believe that when we have people going back to the moon, which I think should happen by 2025, it's quite possible we will have people back on the moon, not just Americans, but people from other countries, as part of an international collaboration, not just men this time, but also women. And then as a stepping stone to having people on Mars. And people will say, this is an awful waste of money. I say, on the contrary, it's a chance to elevate our consciousness, that when we see humanity having this common mission, it will help us to see things in a different perspective, as happened briefly in the 60s and 70s. And when it's on a permanent basis, then we will start to reach into a different part of people's soul. After all, the physics of the universe is absolutely amazing. Some of the most tremendous accomplishments of humanity were the two Voyager spacecraft that were launched as long ago as when Richard Nixon was president. They were launched to go on a multi-decade mission to Jupiter and beyond. And they're still sending back signals after all this time. One of them has now left the solar system. It's quite astonishing that this has happened, and it's just the start of many other things that can take place. So I do believe we will find many benefits to a mission to go to Mars. It won't just be done by government this time. It will be the best of private initiatives in some kind of partnership to be worked out with some of the best of public initiatives as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much going on in space right now, from exploration to Space Force to back to the moon to asteroid mining to a lot of experiments on the ISS, biology experiments, and prepping for prepping for Mars habitation. There's a lot of work going on there. And how do we get off the planet? Do we use balloons? Do we use a space elevator? Reusable rockets? And obviously, how do we clean up a lot of the space junk that's going around? This is a huge issue with space junk. We've got a lot of satellites and a lot of space debris, and we need to figure out a way to tame that so that we have a free trajectory. There's a lot going on in space, and it's really, really exciting. And I'm for one so excited about space. And I agree, our ultimate destiny is not just here on Earth. I think it has to be. We have to, for the survivability of the species, to increase those chances. You have to become multiplanetary. It isn't an option. Everyone was, look at the news. Coronavirus is going to wipe out all of species. Okay, but if we're multiplanetary, that risk basically drops to zero, because all you do is you stop the transfer of one infected body to another, and you're done, right? So once we're onto the moon, and once we're onto Mars, and once we're out there on the asteroids, and then we have you're done, you're finished. The human species can perpetuate itself almost indefinitely after that point, and that's kind of what you want. You want to have your you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. You want to perpetuate yourself out. And I do like this notion of the Earthrise. I call it the post-Earthrise trauma that a lot of people associated with. They sort of woke up one day and they all realized, oh wow, this is where we've been fighting. This is where we've been sleeping and eating and carrying on like baboons for a while on this. What Carl Sagan say, small blue pale dot. This is a really precious entity, and the consciousness of life and the value of life shot up on that day when people realized, not just mathematically, not just the circumference of on pi or whatever, but actually that this is the fragile object that needs to be protected. And I think from that day forward, there was a transhumanist movement where people said, all right, we now have to start evolving and fighting our own tendencies, our own evolutionary genetics, and the world did start changing. The United Nations started becoming a thing. Declaration of Human Rights started becoming a thing. They started becoming more serious. It's not just World War II. These World War One led to the League of Nations, which collapsed. So it's obviously not just human traumatic events such as huge mega interglobal global wars that perpetuate these ideas. The League of Nations fell to bits. But since then since that day we have had a whole different perspective on the universe and of the fragility of Earth as a global system. It's just the fact that the Earth is large enough to sort of put that out of your head in your day-to-day life that people have been ticking over. But with climate change, I think people getting whacked left, right, and center. And when it does start hitting down on their personal lives, they will start to think again about the fragility of the global system, and again starting to think about humanity as an object and a species that needs to perpetuate itself throughout the stars. I think this is something that is really important. Look, I don't want to keep you up all night. I want to tell everybody they should go out and do this. There's also a lot of other chapters in there that we didn't even get to cover. Politics and AI, people. This is amazing. Politics and AI is huge. How do politics and AI are going to live together? Are we heading into a more trust? Is it more trust or less trust? Nuclear fission, new ideas for energy. We've been going through a cheap energy boom, but it's a dirty cheap energy boom under the hydrocarbon revolution. Politics and trust, clean meat. Clean meat is huge, and I think clean meat has been something that's it's been coming down the pipeline since the post-Earthrise trauma. I think people start to realize about the sentient life, and again, it's our old human nature. Meat for us, especially when it's fatted up with a lot of the fats and sugars that are injected into it, with a lot of the sauces and stuff, it does taste very, very good. But I think since PETA and a lot of the revelations on farming and stuff, a lot of people are starting to come to a different conclusion about meat worldwide, and with radical technological advances in how to grow lab meats is huge. Carbon neutrality, that's huge. Reducing a carbon footprint as either individuals or as nation states. Open borders. Reducing crime. Evaluating and education. Education, global education. Can it be done by AI? How much impact has the internet had? There is so much more to cover in this book. So you've got to go out. You got to have a look at that RAFT 2035 Roadmap to Abundance, Flourishing, and Transcendence. Please, please, please. It is such a great book to read. You'll get addicted to it like me. David, I really want to thank you for coming on this episode of Detonation. I want to really thank you for putting the effort in to write this book. It's something that's going to go on my shelf. Definitely.
It's been my pleasure to be here. Yes, there's more in the book. There's not just the individual chapters, as you mentioned. There's connections between things, and it's the set of connections which I believe provide the most profound possibilities, both good possibilities and dangerous possibilities if we mismanage them.
Yeah.
So let's get them in people's minds. Let's highlight the positive possibilities. Let's encourage people to get involved, to set aside some of our distractions and to find ways to collaborate to make this vision a reality, rather than the bad outcomes which might also sadly take place.
Yeah, well, we don't want any of the bad outcomes to take place. The bad outcomes are very harsh to think about, and they're not really fun because they kind of could be inevitable if done incorrectly. The book is I'm telling you, people, you got to get this book. It's very well structured as well. The way it's actually been structured with every chapter is also very good. It's very intuitive, so that when people ask you questions, you could flick to the structure. They have interim targets in each of their chapters, moving forwards, and more information, like we showed you before with the psychedelics. Where other research such is being done, and each chapter is structured in a way that lays out the solution and then builds in a certain way. Do you want to just quickly talk about the structure of the book, because this is actually quite important?
There's 15 goals for the year 2035, and they're split into 6 areas. So the 6 different areas of the book are individual flourishing, which is mental and physical well-being. Then there's social flourishing, because although we might want to be strong individuals, we do depend on our well-being on social relationships, education and work replacement and so on. There is the international dimension as well. We can't thrive as individual nations, sadly, that we are a highly interdependent world, as the coronavirus is one reminder. There is environmental flourishing is the 4th of these sectors. The 5th sector is cosmic flourishing, which is reaching out beyond the Earth and to the energy of the stars, nuclear fusion. And the 6th sector is the political sector, in which we will transform. We look forward to a transformed set of politicians that we can respect and be glad representing us, rather than the ones that we often say lots of uncomplimentary things about as at present. Even the ones we think are on our side, often we feel bad about what they're doing. Well, let's get that changed, and I've set out how that can happen. Finally, there's a couple of chapters at the end. There is a bubbling under, which talks about various other possible goals that might be added into a new iteration on matters such as cryonics, or also ectogenetic pregnancies. And then there's a frequently asked questions chapter at the end, where I address questions that reviewers raised, which I thought were best answered separately at the end. So that's
Beautiful.
the structure of the book. And there's more in some of the other books I've written earlier, which have more of the underlying theory and some of the connections to other thinkers in this field. But this is meant to be reasonably snappy, reasonably self-contained, and something that's going to motivate people to get involved in at least one or two of the projects in the course of the months and years ahead. Because we need to get together. Where this future is amazing, but in order to increase the likelihood of getting there, each of us have got to find our roles in this.
Well, we're going to keep working harder here at Dead Nation. We want to bring about this future as well. Keep pushing forward here. Hey, thank you, Thrivous, for sponsoring this episode. You know what to do. If you, David, you can participate in this as well. Thank Thrivous. Follow the description rules and get yourself some free Thrivous. The more of you that share, the more money you're going to make. So that's fantastic. Mike DeVerde and Brett Nally. I think Mike DeVerde is buying a couple of products now. He's very happy with his products. His energy is going up. He's thinking quicker. He's thinking smarter. So well done to you, Mike DeVerde out there, and Brett Nally, who've also won some Thrivous. And thank you to David Kelly. I Am Transhuman. Great campaign. Everybody should go and check out I Am Transhuman. That's a fantastic campaign being thrown out there. Thank you to our Patreon supporters, Chairman Gennady Stolyaryov II. That's the USTP, very close with the USTP, always have been since the launch of Detonation. We love the Transhumanist-Party in the United States and wish them all the best. David Shoemaker, very good friend of the show, and Mike DeVerde, thank you very much for helping us out here at Detonation. All right, well, thank you very much, David Wood. You have been absolutely fantastic. I hope you get some good sleep, sir. Thank you for staying up so late at night. People have to realize that there is a lot more packed into this book. Check out the book. It's amazing. Thank you very much, sir. My pleasure. Thank you so much. All right, more coming to you all this week. Thank you, everybody, for watching Detonation. I'm Steel Archer.